Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from the first group, and today we'll be presenting about corporate social responsibility, or we call it CSR. So this presentation will be presented by Mumtaz Nabiha, Nur Hafizah binti Azman, Malina binti Ali Umar, and also Syazwani binti Hafizah. So for the executive summary, basically in this video we will be discussing on the concept of corporate social responsibility, the societal perspective, the strategy-driven perspective, and also the stakeholders' perspective. There will also be some examples and also an impact on each perspective. So let's begin with the very first concept, which is the corporate social responsibility.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. My name is Malina binti Aguma. So our group from Group 5 will present regarding the concept of regarding the corporate social responsibility. However, we will explain regarding 4 elements, which is the concept of corporate social responsibility, the societal perspective, the strategy-driven perspective, the stakeholder perspective. Okay, what is corporate social responsibility? Okay, corporate social responsibility, or we can call it a CSR, is a requirement of a manager to consider his action in the whole system and be responsible for the effect of his act anywhere in that system. Okay, in other words, that CSR means that they have to be responsible. Okay, when CSR is exist and accepted, okay, started from 1950, CSR has gained the considerable acceptance, and the meaning has been broadened to include the additional components. Okay, regarding Carroll, has provided 4 understanding component, which is economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic. Okay, however, economic and legal is a requirement, but ethical and philanthropic is expected. So we move to the concept of corporate social responsibility. Okay, for the concept of corporate social responsibility, there are 3 concepts, which is corporate social responsibility, corporate social responsiveness, and corporate social performance. Okay, 3 different concepts emphasize on 3 different items. Okay, we can see from the next slide, which is for the corporate social responsibility, focusing and emphasize on obligation and accountability. Okay, and the corporate social responsiveness emphasize on the action and activity, and lastly, corporate social performance emphasize and focus on the outcome and the result. Okay, okay, for what the definition of corporate social responsibility according to the Carroll is the social responsibility of business is comprising from the economic, legal, ethical, and discretionary, which is expectation that a society has of organization at a given point in time. Okay, which means and Carroll argued that CSR is not an anti-profit concept, but it focusing on how the profit has been made. Okay, and then we move to therefore we can say that corporate social responsibility is an obligation and accountability in any decision and any impact from the decision that we made by the manager. Okay, and we move to the corporate social responsiveness, which is action and activity. Okay, according to the Livingston, that corporate social responsiveness is about the process and implementation of social responsibility activity, which means that how they want to implement and how the manager implement and monitor the assess environmental conditions and attend for the stakeholder demand and design plan and policy to respond to changing the condition. Okay, for example, if anything happen, so how the stakeholder take action and how they monitor it so that it can continuously be implemented. Okay, last but not least is the corporate social performance. Okay, performance, as we know that they emphasize on the outcome and the result. Okay, what is the outcome and the result from the implementation and the monitoring that the manager made. For example, we can see the result if, for example, is at the financial statement. So we can see how the profit, how the business doing, so how they made the profit. Okay, so that's all from me regarding the concept of corporate social responsibility. So I will move to my colleague. Thank you.
So for the societal perspective, before we go into deeper what is the social perspective, let's go with the meaning of society, which is the aggregate of people living together in a more or less ordered community. So in this context of CSR, it is how individual members actually are able to combine and also communicate with each other in internal and external forms. Since most of the employees are from various backgrounds and also cultures, it is important to make everyone consistent and also to have a similar future outlook in the organization. The societal perspective is something that is not frequently discussed, therefore it is a bit hard to find out what exactly it is. But there are 3 different levels, which is external social context, organizational levels, and also individual levels. So as you can see here, this is the levels of the societal perspective. The outer rim of the circle is external social context. The middle one is organizational level, and also the core of it is the individual level. Okay, so the next one is cultural perspective. This organizational level social context refers to a similar assumption mindset, which makes the organization united. Cultures provided a similar base understanding and are able to highly influence the moral character of the members in an organization. There will also be members with various backgrounds and understanding, So without overcoming this issue, it will eventually lead to a chaotic interest and also affect the overall performance of the organization. Knowing one's culture portrays their behavior and thinking style that may attract shareholders and the society. Having said that, cultures impacted organization to improvise their current organization to suit the societal perspective in CSR. Humans read situations differently, and sometimes it can be difficult to identify certain things. So the concept of black box is to show difficulty of describing the societal organization in a social aspect. Different from the external social context, this perspective focuses on the micro level, which is embedded with the values, norms, and also orientation. The downside of it is that they did not notice the vital organization's interactions with its external environment, internal cultural conflict, and also shifting cultural viewpoint. So culturally, it is important, but the black box effect still lingers due to the focus on the micro aspects. So for the very first theory, it is the external social context. It is based on institutional theory actually, that includes the concept of isomorphism and also determinism. Basically, isomorphism means to follow rationalized institutional rules that involves coercive, mimetic, and also normative method. It acts as a mechanism to make one thing work on another. Meanwhile, institutional theory believes that determinism may change the external influences despite it being strong. So the new institutional theory also states how the environment chooses certain behavior, meaning that certain organizations with a similar industry tend to move to an institutionally driven organization and produce guides rather than promoting a new set of organizational culture. The issue portrays how important it is to have your own identity as an organization. Also, there is a new occurrence in institutional theory, which is institutional change and entrepreneurship, called ICNE, or let me just call it ICE, which actually highlights the social importance. The endogenous and also exogenous factor plays a big part in changing the organizational structure in terms of social. Endogenous refers to a similar interest, resources, and also actionability, while exogenous is all about institutional sense and market contact. The external environment is known to be very crucial, but the internal party plays an important role too, as they can change the organizational directly or even the culture of the institution. They could even be the reason for a new set of regulation. The impact is indeed powerful and should be noticed. In conclusion to this perspective, it focuses too much on the macro level, as they still believe that external overpowers the internal members in societal aspects. So lastly, it is the cognitive perspective. This is where the mind works differently when difficulty appears. It is about the learning process involved when facing problems in an organization. This perspective refers to a manager who does not participate in the actual works, but actually reads and analyzes how to make different members of the organization who is doing their own activity to have a collective connection. The steps are to actually introduce a change in organization first, because individual will perceive differently. Thus, others will provide their thoughts about the new organization. This provides a lot of new ideas and variation, and it is an actual societal context. The great thing about cognitive is it molds the individual cognitive to a social context mindset, internally and externally. Yet, individual cognitive is affected only in certain social contexts. Therefore, situations are vital from every side to ensure the understanding and interpretations can be united and also bring good effect to the organization.
Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Mumtaz, and in this section, I would like to share on the corporate social responsibility from the strategy driver perspective. Moving on to the next. So, what is the CSR from the perspective of the company or group of the firm or organizational strategy? Because of most of the companies are unable to go beyond the charity program because of the linking in the strategy of the CSR. Therefore, the linking in the strategy of CSR can make companies has very shortcomings here and there. So, the definitions of the strategy CSR is actually the incorporations of a holistic CSR perspective into the strategic planning and core operations of a company, so that the company is managed over the period to long term in the interest of a broad set of stakeholders to achieve the maximum economic and social value. Furthermore, it is explained that companies will decide what things they have the capacity to commit to for being socially responsible by taking a holistic approach, and can choose what should improve their competitive advantage. And also, the organizations will ensure that revenues and improve the shareholder value do not outweigh that need to act ethically with their stakeholders by preparing the CSR as part of the company's overall strategy. By preparing the CSR as a part of company's overall strategy is the key words of strategy of the CSR. Now the question is, how can the strategy CSR help the companies overall? So it provides companies with the solutions. How? It can developing sustainable business practices. Secondly, deciding the organization's capacity for philanthropic activities. Thirdly, identifying and responding to threats and opportunities facing their stakeholders. Fourthly, it can balancing the creating of company value with that of the societal value. Lastly, it actually can manage on how to manage the stakeholders' relationship, especially those with the competing values. Next, how can we ensure or how to ensure the strategy of CSR approach possible or effective? Now, to ensure this happens, we have to ensure the sufficient resources by, firstly, ensure the sufficient resources. This is because the availability of the sufficient financial resources makes any firm potentially more flexible and able to develop any potential and suitable strategies together with their firm's missions. In addition, we also need to consider the manager's role. So the company that has enjoyed a good financial only make the managers interested to make an investment in the CSR field. So that's all from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, my name is Syazwani, and today I will be presenting about the stakeholders' perspective in the CSR. So we have known that nowadays many companies have incorporated CSR in order to improve their corporate governance. From my limited literature research, I've seen there are many researchers that studied about the relationship between CSR and the stakeholders field. It's easy to say that both CSR and the stakeholders theory comes as the two major concepts, which means that it is difficult to delineate CSR and stakeholders as an area because they're often connected with each other. Therefore, it is essential to highlight that the stakeholders actually plays an important role in the CSR. Okay, before we go further in depth, we need to understand what is stakeholder actually means. Okay, firstly, the word stakeholder is actually introduced by Stanford Research Institute (SRI) as those groups without whose support the organization will cease to exist. Okay, this definition actually can be interpreted as stakeholder as the groups or individuals that can affect or be affected by the decision or achievements made by the company. And there are three main categories of stakeholders, which are primary, secondary, and excluded. Moving on to the approaches of the stakeholders, we have known that stakeholders theory have three different approaches, which different with each other but supportive in a way. Okay, the first approach is the descriptive approach. The second one is the instrumental approach, and the third one is the normative approach. These approaches I will be explained in the next minute. Okay, the first approach is the descriptive approach. Right. The descriptive approach is used to get to know the characteristics and the behaviors of the companies. It can be explained that a company with this descriptive approach emphasizes on transparent accountability, which means they provide necessary indicator information that comprises social, environmental, and financial performance. So in connection with CSR, it is important to note that a good company will give a good impact to the society. There are researchers that note descriptive approach as investments, which means that these investments can actually cause the company's potential future growth, because if the company uses this approach, the company can enhance the relationship between the stakeholders and the companies, and therefore increase the company's performance. So moving on to the next approach, which is the instrumental approach. From the stakeholders' view of instrumental system, it can be explained that stakeholders are the individuals that contribute to the wealth creation of the companies, who's either by choice or not. However, a company needs to bear in mind that if they use this instrumental approach that only see stakeholder as their wealth creation contributor, actually obviously cannot succeed by that way. A company needs to know that they cannot continue to operate without the support from the stakeholders. Therefore, it is undoubtedly essential that a company needs to have a good public image in order to attain high-level company's performance. Okay, the last approach of stakeholders' perspective that will be discussed in this video is the normative approach. The normative approach actually proposes the corporate stakeholders relationship with a good foundation and well-accepted philosophical idea. From this perspective, a company should be based on a sense of duty and value, which specifies that all stakeholders are valued and worthy to the company. Thus, it's best to say that this approach actually focuses on what the companies ought to do or what it should be doing. So, as a conclusion, the overall conclusion is that CSR is a company's responsibility toward the society, and it's crucial for companies to plan their own CSR based on the different perspective that we have mentioned in this before. So that's all from us. Thank you for watching.